The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Willow Vale, a quaint wine country town where the air carried the sweet tang of fermenting grapes and the promise of harvest. On this golden October evening, the vineyard estate of Clara Hensley buzzed with the hum of a wedding rehearsal, its sprawling porch adorned with ivy and lanterns casting a warm glow. Clara, a spirited 58-year-old widow with auburn hair streaked with silver, stood at the center of it all, her laughter ringing out as she adjusted her fiancé's tie. She'd built this vineyard from a patch of dirt after losing her husband a decade ago, turning grief into a thriving legacy with her daughter, Sophie, now 9, by her side. Tonight, she was set to marry Daniel Voss, a charming newcomer who'd swept into her life like a summer breeze. But as the rehearsal unfolded, Sophie lingered in the shadows of the grapevines, her small hands clutching a secret, a whispered truth that would unravel the night and echo through their lives long after the last guest departed. Clara's story was one of grit and grace. She'd met her late husband, Paul, in her 20s at a farmer's market, bonding over a shared love of soil and sun. They'd married young, built the vineyard together, and welcomed Sophie late in life, a miracle after years of trying. Paul's death in a tractor accident had shattered Clara, leaving her to raise Sophie alone while keeping the vineyard afloat. She'd poured her soul into both, her hands calloused from pruning vines, her heart softened by Sophie's bright eyes. The winery thrived, award-winning reds, a bustling tasting room, and Sophie grew into a sharp, curious girl who knew every row of grapes like a map of her own heart. For years, Clara resisted romance, her focus on Sophie and the vines. But 2 summers ago, Daniel Voss arrived, a tall, silver-haired man in his early 60s with a warm smile and a knack for storytelling. He'd wandered into the tasting room, claiming to be a retired winemaker from Napa, and charmed Clara with tales of barrel rooms and vintage harvests. Their chats turned to dates, then a whirlwind courtship. Daniel was kind, attentive, bringing Sophie little gifts, wooden puzzles, books about birds, and Clara felt a spark she hadn't known since Paul. She'd hesitated to remarry, but Daniel's patience won her over. "We're a team now," he'd said, proposing under the oldest oak on the estate. Clara said yes, dreaming of a new chapter. Sophie liked Daniel at first. He'd taught her to spot hawks in the sky, laughed at her jokes. But lately, something felt off. When Clara wasn't around, his smiles faded, his voice sharpened. He'd snap at Sophie to stay out of the way, or mutter about the vineyard's profits under his breath. Sophie, wise beyond her years, sensed a shift, a shadow behind his charm. She didn't tell Clara. Her mom was happy, glowing, and Sophie hated the thought of dimming that light. But the shadow grew, and tonight, as the rehearsal hummed, it would break free. The porch was alive with guests, local vintners, Clara's old friend Ruth from the co-op, the pastor adjusting his notes. Sophie stood by the trellis, her flower girl dress itching, her stomach churning. She'd overheard something last week, Daniel on the phone in the barn, his voice low and clipped. "Once it's mine, we'll sell it off, split the cash. She's clueless." Sophie didn't catch the rest, but the words stuck like thorns. She'd crept closer, heart pounding, and heard a name, Marla, followed by laughter that chilled her. Since then, she'd watched Daniel, catching his glances at the vineyard like a hawk eyeing prey. Tonight, she'd decided to act. Clara had taught her to use the old security camera in the tasting room, meant for thieves, not fiancés, but Sophie had repurposed it. For days, she'd hidden it in the barn, recording Daniel's late-night calls when he thought no one was near. She'd synced it to her tablet, a gift from Clara for her birthday, and watched in secret. The clips were damning. Daniel and a woman named Marla plotting to take the vineyard, sell it to developers, leave Clara with nothing. Worse, they'd sneered about Sophie. "A brat will ship off somewhere," and laughed about finishing the job if Clara got wise. Sophie didn't know what that meant, but it scared her enough to act. The rehearsal began, Clara radiant in a cream shawl, Daniel dapper in a suit, his arm around her. Sophie clutched her tablet, hidden in her basket of petals, her palms sweaty. She'd planned to wait, show Clara after, but the pastor's words, "If anyone objects, speak now," hit her like a thunderclap. She couldn't wait. She tugged Clara's sleeve, her voice a whisper. "Mom, I need you. Now." Clara frowned, glancing at Daniel, who smiled tightly. "Sweetie, can it wait? We're in the middle." "No," Sophie insisted, her eyes wide. "Please." Clara saw the fear in her daughter's face, a look she'd never ignored. She excused herself, Daniel's brow furrowing as she led Sophie to the barn's edge. "What's wrong, Soph?" she asked, kneeling. Sophie thrust the tablet forward, her hands shaking. "Watch this." Clara pressed play, her face paling as Daniel's voice filled the air. Scheming, cold, cruel. She heard Marla's laugh, the plan to strip her of everything, the threat to Sophie. Her breath hitched, her hands trembling as the clip ended. This can't be real," she whispered, but Sophie's tears told her it was. Daniel approached, his smile faltering. "Everything okay, ladies?" he asked, his tone too smooth. Clara stood, her voice ice. "Who's Marla, Daniel?" His face froze, a crack in the mask. "What? I don't—" "Don't lie," Clara snapped, holding up the tablet. "I heard it all. Your plan, the sale. Sophie, how could you?" The guests turned, murmurs rising. Daniel stammered, "Clara, it's a misunderstanding." "No," Sophie cut in, her small voice fierce. "You're a liar. You want to hurt us." Clara's eyes blazed, years of grit surging back. "Get out," she said, her voice low and lethal. "Now." Daniel's charm dissolved, his jaw tightening. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but Clara stepped forward, unflinching. "The only regret is trusting you. Leave, or I call the sheriff." Ruth, overhearing, was already dialing, her glare pinning Daniel. He hesitated, then stormed off, the rehearsal collapsing into stunned silence. Clara sank to her knees, pulling Sophie close, tears spilling. "You saved us, baby," she whispered. Sophie clung to her, relief washing over her fear. "I had to, Mom. I love you." The days that followed were a blur. Daniel vanished, but Clara didn't wait. She hired a lawyer, secured the vineyard's title, and filed charges with the recordings as proof. Marla, tracked to a motel in Napa, confessed under pressure, exposing Daniel's scheme to defraud widows across wine country. The sheriff hauled him in, his charm no match for handcuffs. Willow Vale rallied. Ruth organized a harvest party to lift Clara's spirits. Vintners sent support, and Sophie became a quiet hero. Clara struggled, her trust bruised, but Sophie's courage anchored her. One evening, as they sat on the porch, the vineyard stretching before them, Clara spoke. "I thought I needed someone else to be whole again. I was wrong. It's us, Soph. Always has been." Sophie smiled, leaning into her. "We're enough, Mom." Clara nodded, the ache easing. She'd lost Paul, nearly lost the vineyard, but Sophie's bravery had forged a new strength. They'd weathered the storm, their roots deeper than ever. Weeks later, under a harvest moon, Clara hosted a tasting. Friends, locals, no pretense. Sophie poured juice for the kids, her laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. Clara raised hers, her voice steady. "To family, the ones we choose, the ones who fight for us." The crowd toasted, and Sophie beamed, her small hand in Clara's calloused one. The vineyard stood as proof. Love and trust could outlast any betrayal, echoing through the vines like a song only they could hear. One whisper saved a legacy. This tale proves that courage can uproot the deepest lies. If Sophie's bravery moved you, drop a like to show it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that stir the soul. What would you protect like Clara's vines? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're all listening. Until next time, hold this close. True roots grow stronger through the storm.